Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of Peerless Volume 4, also known as Wu Shuang by Meng Xi Shi. And, well, I was going to say exactly what chapters we're covering, but just in case I'm feeling the gusto again, I'm just going to say we're starting at chapter 130. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? Chapter 130. Feng Xiao was painting when Qiao Xian arrived. He was entirely focused, smiling faintly as he moved the brush across the paper. It seemed he was in high spirits. Qiao Xian grudgingly bowed in greeting. Qiao Xian of the Zuoye Bureau greets the deputy chief. Feng Xiao didn't raise his head nor pause in his strokes. Although Qiao Xian didn't have a clear view of the painting, she saw that Feng Xiao's smile seemed to flow through the brush tip and onto the rattan paper on the desk, a beauty painting beneath the balmy autumn sun. Qiao Xian found this man irritating beyond measure, but she had to admit it was a stunning scene. All that loveliness was shattered the moment Feng Xiao spoke. It appears Cui Buqiu still refused to come himself. This humble subordinate has come on the chief's orders to pick up something owed to the Zuoye Bureau. I ask the deputy chief to please accept his loss. Feng Xiao ignored her icy gaze. The bet was between me and Cui Buqiu, he said, all smiles. If he wants the list of names, he may pick them up himself. I won't acknowledge anyone else. Besides, he paused a moment, setting down the brush and studying the completed painting before looking back up at Qiao Xian. Cui Buqiu alone is qualified to call himself my equal. You call yourself humble, but your tone suggests otherwise. You don't sound like a subordinate in the slightest. Does Cui Buqiu keep you around under the delusion that your attitude will help relieve his burdens? At Qiao Xian's stunned expression, Feng Xiao's lips curled in a faintly malicious smile. You know your way around disguises, and you know some medicine as well. But in the Jiajian Bureau, people like you are replaceable. If I offered one of my people to Cui Buqiu, would he accept them? Would they take your place? Anger surged in Qiao Xian's heart. She wanted to retort, but by the time the words were on her tongue, she decided there was no point in arguing. In the end, she merely said coldly, I'm afraid I must disappoint you. The palace has already sent us an attendant to serve as the Lord Chief's new bodyguard. Then you've been set aside? Asked Feng Xiao in surprise. Qiao Xian pressed her lips together and said nothing. Moments later, Pei Jingzhe watched Qiao Xian's back as she furiously stalked out. He couldn't stop himself from asking, Sir, if Cui Buqiu really comes, do we give him the list? Feng Xiao arched a brow. If he's willing to yield, why shouldn't we give it to him? That list contains secret information on officials of all ranks. How much time and effort did it take the Jiajian Bureau to create that list in the first place? And you're willing to just give it away? Feng Xiao smiled. You don't understand, Cui Buqiu. If he chooses to appear in person, he'll come prepared to make a trade. You know that list is worth more than a game of shupu, so how could Cui Buqiu not? He never expected me to hand it over without a fight. If he hasn't come, it's only because he doesn't think the Zuoye Bureau has anything that will impress me. Pei Jingzhe's confusion multiplied. Then you are hoping he comes, or that he doesn't? Instead of answering his question, Feng Xiao said, Go find out who the Empress assigned to him. She hadn't done it secretly, so finding out should be a simple matter. Pei Jingzhe acknowledged the order and left. He returned within the hour. Sir, it's the Sima General of the Right Guard, Guan Shanhai. 3 generations of his family have served in the army, and Guan Shanhai has proven himself a skilled wielder of the spear on the battlefield. He's expected to succeed the commanding general of the Right Guard within the capital in the future. That the Empress assigned him to the Zuoye Bureau shows how much she values them. Feng Xiao sneered. On the battlefield, a soldier is up against thousands of opponents. His strength lies in breaking through enemy lines. Those aren't the skills of a bodyguard. Guan Shanhai has enjoyed a steady stream of promotions. His career has been smooth sailing, and his skills are the real thing. He must be an arrogant man. I imagine he's unhappy at having been assigned to the Zuoya Bureau." With that, he stood to head out. Pei Jingzhe hurried after him. "Where are you going?" Feng Xiao folded his hands behind his back. "To the Zuoya Bureau, to watch the show," he said languidly. He made it sound like he was stepping out to visit a neighbor, but the Zhejian and Zuoya bureaus were nowhere near each other. But sir, you just said you'd wait for Cui Bichu to yield." "When the terrain won't change for you, you must adapt to the terrain. The Empress would never do such a thing without a reason. If she sends someone like Guan Shanhai, she must have some new task for Cui Bichu. Besides, showing up at his door and making him yield will have the same result." "You call this making him yield? It's clear you're the one who can't wait anymore. You're going there to provoke him yourself, aren't you?" Pei Jingzhe had interacted with Cui Bichu on several occasions. Though Cui Bichu knew no martial arts, his gaze always made Pei Jingzhe feel as if he was being stripped bare. He'd start feeling guilty even if he hadn't done anything. "Is the Zuoya Bureau the reason you're trying to get close to Cui Bichu?" he asked. Feng Xiao chuckled. "What good is the Zuoya Bureau without Cui Bichu?" But then, what's so special about Cui Bichu?" Pei Jingzhe asked, puzzled. Fanning himself, Feng Xiao strolled along in no hurry. "That Cui fellow. His appearance is unremarkable. He's moody, stingy, and vindictive, with a tongue as sharp as a knife. He takes a mile when you give him an inch, hides his cunning beneath a harmless facade, and his mind is bursting with schemes. He's perpetually ill, yet never wallows in self-pity, and he spends his days darting about trying to claim the credit for other people's work. If not for me, he'd have met his end 100 times over in Boiling Commandery and Mount Tianan. So, if you're asking what makes him special, I suppose he has a special love of courting death." Pei Jingzhe was dumbfounded. He'd asked the question offhand, yet Feng Xiao had immediately started rambling. According to him, there was nothing good about Cui Bichu. But if that was so, why couldn't Deputy Chief Feng leave well enough alone? When Cui Bichu was quiet, his lordship Fengar made sure to send him a reminder. And when Cui Bichu did send someone, Fengar kept him hanging, insisting he come himself. Pei Jingzhe had no idea how the two of them had made it through their time in Boiling without incident. 2 tigers couldn't share a mountain. Logically, either Feng Xiao should have died of rage, or Cui Bichu should have perished from a beating. Yet both had returned unscathed. Pei Jingzhe felt that something was odd here, but he was at a loss as to what it could be. The Zuoya Bureau was indeed much livelier with the addition of Guan Shanhai. Everyone in the Zuoya Bureau, especially those capable enough to work closely with Cui Bichu, had been with him for a long time. In turn, Cui Bichu placed great trust in them. Yet Guan Shanhai had practically fallen from the sky. Without doing anything to earn it, he was suddenly second only to Jiang Xun and Song Liang Chun. He outranked everyone else, including Qiao Shen. What was more, the Empress herself had ordered it. Naturally, all eyes were on him, and whispers swirled through the bureau. Qiao Shen stewed in unhappiness. Finally, she couldn't take it any longer. She gathered herself and publicly asked Guan Shanhai to spar. She had no idea that Guan Shanhai found this new arrangement demeaning. Though he hadn't voiced it, he too was dissatisfied. He readily agreed to Qiao Shen's request. They agreed to spar on the Zuoya Bureau's training grounds. The news spread like wildfire through the bureau, and soon the field was packed full. Even Cui Bichu came to watch, looking on in astonishment. Qiao Shen specialized in graceful swordplay, while Guan Shanhai's spear techniques were bold and powerful. From their martial arts to their experience, they were utterly incompatible, yet they had been thrown together by the Zuoya Bureau. The match began. Both combatants possessed strong wills, and their attacks were merciless. Qiao Shen floated over the training grounds in her white clothes, practically adrift on the breeze as her sword danced toward her opponent. Only the sharp-eyed noticed her toes tapping the ground as she landed and took off again. Her Qinggong was stunning. Qiao Xian didn't care what the spectators thought. She merely wanted to prove that she was more qualified to accompany Cui Bichu than the interloper Guan Shanhai. Her sword chi sliced toward Guan Shanhai's face. With a flick of his wrist, his spear point jabbed out in a series of tight circles that surged forth one after the other to block Qiao Xian's offensive. His gaze was harsh and cold. Sweep, jab, tap, pull. These were the 4 fundamental movements of the spear, and Guan Shanhai moved through them like breathing. His spear, Wen Yue, transformed into a living thing as it punched toward his enemy with crushing force. The spearhead streaked through the air, leaving icy sparks in its wake. While the onlookers were still dazzled, it painted a second silvery arc that connected with the first to form the bright outline of the yin-yang symbol. The first jab neutralized Qiao Xian's attack. The second drew in qi to cloak himself. The final jab switched from defense to offense. The spear stabbed toward Qiao Xian. Beneath a blazing sun, Guan Shanhai's chiseled bronzed features were intent, as if he were facing not Qiao Xian, but an army of thousands. He wove through the battlefield, disregarding his enemies, his surroundings, his very life and death. Mountains toppled, seas overturned, the sun and moon rose and fell, the trees and bushes splintered. Spring bled into autumn. Against a host of 1,000, he alone was enough. Qiao Xian realized his spear had caught her sword. The dazzling glare was inches from her, piercing toward her face. Bloodlust filled the air as she felt a sharp pain between her brows. Alarmed, Qiao Xian attempted to leap back in retreat, but her sword was trapped. She couldn't pull away. Even if she let go, the bloodlust was already upon her. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. In the next instant, twin blasts of air funneled toward them from opposite directions, each carrying a stone that targeted Guan Shanhai's left and right shoulders. Guan Shanhai sprang up, avoiding the stones, then landed smoothly on the ground. With a twirl of his wrist, he drew back his spear. Qiao Xian's nerves were still singing. She fell to one knee, too ashamed to look at Cui Bichu. "This subordinate is incompetent. Please forgive me, Lord Chief." All warriors experience both victory and defeat, but you should know where to draw the line when it comes to one of your own. The first sentence was meant for Qiao Xian, but the second was aimed at Guan Shanhai. Guan Shanhai pursed his lips and cupped his hands. "This subordinate understands his wrongdoings." Cui Bichu turned to the 2 men who'd just walked in. "Deputy Chief Feng, what ill wind has blown you here?" There'd been 2 stones just now, one thrown by Jiangsun Bodi and the other by Feng Xiao. "Ever since Mount Tianan, Cui Longjun has shut himself away and refused all guests. Of course, I missed you dearly. We shared both joy and sorrow, life and death on that journey. How could I live with myself if I didn't come to see you?" Cui Bichu sneered. And here I wondered if Deputy Chief Feng finally remembered the bet he lost. Has your guilty conscience brought you here to pay your debt? The autumn wind churned up the sand of the training grounds and tossed the hems of their robes. Qiao Xian watched their confrontation. How had Feng Xiao walked into the Zuoyue bureau with such ease? The Zuoyue guard should have done everything in their power to bar him entry. Even if he overpowered them, they should have sprinted here to make their report. But the guards had clearly done nothing of the sort. Feng Xiao had strolled into the training grounds without any obstruction. She could only guess that Cui Bichu must have given the instruction in advance. As long as Feng Xiao came himself, there was no need to stop him. These 2 had started off as bitter enemies. When had this begun, that the master of the Zhejian Bureau could saunter into the Zuoye Bureau as if it was his own home? Perhaps Feng Xiao guessed her thoughts because his smile widened. Cui Bichu waved a hand, dispersing the crowd. He led Feng Xiao toward the pavilion in the middle of the bureau's pond. "To what do we owe the pleasure, Deputy Chief Feng?" He was bored and ran over to watch the excitement. Pei Jing just scoffed silently. I came to give you the list you asked for, said Feng Xiao. Cui Buchu halted in his steps and frowned. Since when did you become so generous? Feng Xiao sighed. I know the list is of great importance to you. You hope to use it to unearth all the spies the 13 floors of Yuanhai have planted within the imperial court. But how could I hand over something so valuable to just anyone? I waited for you to come to my door and claim it, but you refused. What choice did I have except to make the trip myself? But if you doubt my sincerity, I'll be on my way. He turned to leave. Without thinking, Cui Buchu reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Instantly, Cui Buchu realized he'd revealed his eagerness and let go. But it was too late. A gleeful smile spread across Feng Xiao's face. If you want it so much, why don't we sit and have a nice chat, Cui Buchu couldn't relax for a second around this man. He blew out a slow breath. What do you want? Feng Xiao reached out and brushed his fingers across Cui Buchu's cheek. Cui Buchu tried to evade, but that hand swiftly grazed past his temple, reaching for the top knot in the back of his head and plucking the jade hairpin free. He waved the hairpin in front of Cui Buchu. To stop you from defaulting on your debt, he said, I have no choice but to take this hairpin as collateral. He still remembered the way Cui Buchu had looked leaving the cave, his hair loose and his lips pale. There'd been a harsh coldness to him, like a lone pine growing at a cliff's edge. Some other fastener was holding Cui Buchu's hair in place, because it didn't come loose upon losing the hairpin. A pity, Feng Xiao thought. I'm afraid Deputy Chief Feng's request will be too hard to fulfill, Cui Buchu said tonelessly. I haven't even said it yet. How do you know it'll be hard to fulfill? Cui Buchu's eyes lingered briefly on the jade hairpin in Feng Xiao's hand. He pressed his lips together and said nothing. Clearly, Cui Buchu was the one who wanted something from him, yet he refused to speak a single cajoling word. Feng Xiao considered this for a moment, running his fingers over the hairpin as if it was the bony knuckles of Cui Buchu's own hand. I'm sorry, y'all. My eyes saw what I was reading next before I started. I want you. Under Cui Buchu's stunned gaze, he slowly finished his sentence. To do me a favor. Oh my God. The list. In exchange for a gargantuan favor. Remember, Cui Buchu, you owe me. Since the moment they left in Liugong City, they'd entangled even tighter, neither enemies nor friends, impossible to separate for the rest of their lives. Chapter 131. In Guangqian County, rain sheeted down. Murkiness swirled above and below, impenetrable no matter where one looked. The sky and earth had merged into a single dark void, isolated from the rest of the world as they dissolved into one another. The rain that poured from the clouds seemed inexhaustible, as if the heavens themselves were emptying basin after basin in the mortal realm. The flatlands transformed into swamp, and the river swelled to engulf the fields and their crops on its banks. On the horizon, the silhouettes of houses were a distant smudge. Rongqing waded through the mud, staggering as he went. All his surprise, fear, and confusion melted away at the scene before him, leaving only stupefaction. Everything was done for. All the lives and families here had been thoroughly ruined. The land beneath his feet should have been a prosperous village. Half a month ago, the village had been at its most bustling, farmers tramping in from the fields, children chasing each other as they played. Smoke wafted from every house, and passers-by could smell the homely scents of cooking. Yet now there was only water as far as the eye could see. The torrential rain had swollen the river, and the waters overflowed their banks and rushed over the city and its outskirts. The rain refused to stop, growing heavier as the waters grew higher, until there was nowhere the floodwaters did not touch. Umbrellas became useless burdens in the face of the rain's wild laughter. It split their oil paper canopies and streamed in through the cracks, drenching the people beneath. Rongqing shoved his attendant's hand, holding his umbrella away, exposing himself to the rain. His head and face were soaked with rainwater, and he could barely open his eyes. He scrubbed at his face and squinted hard, as did everyone around him. They were all mourning the disaster, their tears indistinguishable from the rain streaming down their despairing faces. "Sir!" the attendant called after Rongqing, trying to keep pace with him as he walked off. But the rain swallowed his voice in an instant. He couldn't even hear himself. "Young man, stop Censor Zhong! Quickly! We can't keep going in the rain. We won't be able to get back!" An accompanying official roared with all their strength. The attendant, Xiao Liu, jerked his head around, looking out at the rain. When they arrived, most of the higher terrain had been visible, but in just a short time, even that had been submerged. The land around them was like a giant turtle slowly sinking, only the top of its shell still above the water. Frightened, he ran to catch up with Rongqing. The man tripped over a submerged stone in his haste and fell, splashing muddy water all over his face. Just ahead, Rongqing found himself surrounded by water on all sides, trapped with no way forward or back. The only thing beside him was an old tree, similarly stranded, creaking ominously in the floodwaters and helpless to resist its fate. Xiao Liu ignored the pain in his knees and roared with all his might, "Quick! You must save my lord!" The other officials looked at each other helplessly. Freshly arrived from the capital, on hearing about the flood, Imperial Censor Rongqing had insisted on leaving the safer highlands of the county to survey the region himself. Everyone had tried to dissuade him, to no avail. The magistrate of Guangqian County had no choice but to send the deputy magistrate and some officials to accompany their visitor. Yet to their horror, the floods had grown more severe during their expedition, the waters beginning to encroach on the high ground. Even the hillsides that had originally lain above the reach of the flood were swiftly engulfed. A small flotilla of wooden buckets and clothes floated on the waves. A clump of black hair drifted among them, hinting at someone submerged below. Whether they were dead or alive was anyone's guess. The people here could barely save themselves. They'd never dare undertake the risk of saving others. Only Censor Rongqing remained utterly fearless, apparently determined to push forward and save the person. Now, however, he found himself stranded and waiting for a rescuer of his own. The deputy magistrate, Li Yan, had already silently cursed Rongqing a couple thousand times. Should they rescue him or not? If they attempted a rescue, there was a good chance they'd be swept away as well. But if they left him to drown, Rongqing was a censor from the imperial court. They were sure to be held responsible by the higher-ups if he perished here. Still, this was a natural disaster. The censor had a death wish. Surely there was nothing they could do. Li Yan thought furiously. He knew how to swim, but a choice as simple as taking a step forward or back here might decide his fate. If he disregarded his own safety to save the censor, perhaps he would drown instead. His face filled with panic at the thought. "What should we do? I'll go find someone to rescue Censor Zhong." But who could possibly make it in time? A rare flash of inspiration struck Xiao Liu. He lunged forward and clutched at Li Yan, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Please save my lord! Let's take off our belts and tie our waists together. Then hold each other's hands and walk over. We'll make it in time." Li Yan gritted his teeth. Even a sturdy hemp rope could get washed away in this current, let alone a flimsy cloth belt. As they argued, the water climbed higher. The flood was lapping at Xiao Liu's ankles, and the water seemed poised to rise again. Rongqing only had a tiny patch of dry ground left to stand on. He couldn't move an inch. Xiao Liu's voice was thick with terrified tears. "Please wait, sir. We're coming to save your lordship now." Li Yan looked at the 3 petty officials who'd accompanied them. The rain blurred their expressions. No one was willing to risk themselves to save an unfamiliar imperial censor, and Rongqing had already earned their dislike. He'd been accusing and criticizing them since the moment he arrived. It was one thing if he wanted to get himself killed, but now he was putting them in danger too. After a moment's hesitation, Li Yan made his decision. Yet in the next instant, a figure flew past, so swift he couldn't even make out the color of their clothes through the heavy rain. That smudge of shadow landed on the shrinking patch where Rongqing stood, grabbed Rongqing by the shoulders and hoisted him up, then leapt off the old tree back to the others. This area was no drier, but at least there was a place to stand. "Sir!" Xiao Liu cried in shocked pleasure. "What are you staring for? Get moving!" the rescuer said harshly. Now that he was closer, they could see he was clad in blue robes. His voice was somehow able to penetrate the curtain of rain because they could hear him clearly. No one dared to tarry any longer. They rushed to higher ground, and Xiao Liu staggered after them, supporting Rongqing. The heavens smiled on them. The rain gradually receded, and the water slowed their aggressive climb. Everyone had a chance to catch their breath as they crested the hill. They saw the gates of the city beckoning to them in the distance, and their hearts, which had been ready to leap out of their throats, settled back into their chests. They'd long since lost their umbrellas, and everyone was so spattered with mud it was impossible to guess what colors they'd originally been wearing. It was all they could do to trudge forward one step at a time toward their destination. Xiao Liu's legs went weak. He collapsed, dragging Rongqing down with him. Their blue-clad rescuer snorted derisively, then gathered his strength and leapt away, bounding toward the city without looking back. The attendant would normally have complained, but at the moment he lacked the energy to say anything. Rongqing's state was a little better. 2 hours later, everyone had finally straggled into the city. Rongqing declined Deputy Magistrate Li Yan's invitation to rest at the county office and returned to his lodgings at the relay station. Li Yan didn't bother trying to persuade him. His attitude toward Rongqing had cooled considerably. The enthusiasm with which he'd greeted him upon his arrival was nowhere to be found. Soaking in the relay station's bathtub, Rongqing washed the grime from his body. Then he wolfed down his meal, feeling his strength gradually return. In the quiet of the room, he realized how close he'd been to death. He was gripped by a lingering fear. The imperial court had dispatched him to Guangtian County to assess the flood damage and provide disaster relief. Dying like that would have been too great a humiliation. Not long after, Xiao Liu came to his room, hanging his head in apology. "Sir, I nearly failed to save you. Li Yan stalled on purpose," he complained. "I'm telling you, he was about to push me into the water too and silence us both. He just wanted to absolve himself of the blame." Rongqing didn't share the intensity of his grudge. "I insisted on going out in person," he said calmly. His anger is understandable. Xiao Liu would have liked to say more, but instead he changed the subject. "That man who rescued you looked familiar. If I'm not wrong, he came with Cui Buqu." "They're here already?" Xiao Liu said in surprise. "Then will Cui Xuanxiang blame you?" He'd hardly finished his sentence when the porter tapped on the door with an invitation. It read, "Lord Cui cordially invites the censor to a meal at Yi R Tea House." Speak of the devil. Rongqing smiled thinly. "He saved my life. Even if he wishes to censure me, I must turn the other cheek." This incident had begun 10 days ago, when a report had arrived in the capital from Guangtian County. The county was suffering unexpectedly heavy rains, which caused the river to swell and overflow its banks. Much of the commandery had been swept up in the subsequent flood, and the seat of government, Guangqian County itself, had been hardest hit. Displaced, starving victims of the disaster were everywhere. They pleaded for the court to distribute grain as disaster relief. Guangqian County suffered floods almost every year during the rainy season, but this year, the flooding was especially severe. The imperial court agreed to send grain, and the emperor sent an imperial censor, Rongqing, along with it to supervise the relief efforts. Only on the day of his departure did Rongqing learn that Cui Buqu, the reclusive chief of the Zuoye Bureau, would join him on his journey. Cui Buqu held a missive personally issued by the empress. Rongqing read it 3 times before confirming it was the genuine article. But this arrangement was too strange. According to rank, Cui Buqu should have been in charge of this assignment, yet the emperor hadn't said a word. Instead, the order had come from the empress. When Rongqing considered the duties of the Zuoye Bureau, he couldn't help thinking the empress had sent their chief to keep an eye on him. Rongqing had been an official of the Sui court for some time, but he had never interacted with organizations like the Zuoye and Jiejian bureaus, which navigated the gray areas between righteousness and deception. In his eyes, Cui Buqu was nothing more than a lucky opportunist who'd managed to claw his way to the top, a sentiment shared by many in the Sui government. There was no issue when they stayed in their separate spheres, but now that they'd been asked to cooperate, Rongqing felt deeply conflicted. They'd first met in Baoqiao, on the outskirts of the capital. The encounter had been tense, but not hostile, superficially courteous. Rongqing had politely deferred to Cui Buqu for instructions, at which point Cui Buqu had explained that Rongqing would be in charge of this mission, and was free to do as he saw fit. Rongqing took this as permission to drop his false obsequiousness. He had his carriage readied and set off for Guangqian Commandery without waiting for Cui Buqu. He was vehemently opposed to any interference from the Zuoye Bureau on principle. He rushed to Guangqian Commandery, only to find the reality far more horrifying than he'd anticipated. He'd never before witnessed a disaster of such magnitude. As an imperial censor whose job was to regulate other government agencies, Rongqing was driven by a fervent desire to aid the populace. He tirelessly conducted surveys of the damages, even venturing out to the submerged villages themselves. Ignoring the dangers, he pressed on toward the outskirts of the county, where the flooding was at its worst. His reckless bravery had nearly cost him his life, yet to his surprise, Cui Buqu, who he'd assumed to be still en route, had not only arrived, but sent someone out to rescue him. When Rongqing came to the tea house and spotted Cui Buqu, his complexion even paler than it had been a few days earlier in Baoqiao, he was overcome with shame. A hot flush crept up from his neck to his ears, and he was compelled to bow deeply before Cui Buqu. "Chief Cui, I can't thank you enough for saving my life." Chapter 132. Censor Zhong, if Guan Shanhai hadn't arrived when he did, were you prepared to die in the floodwaters? Rongqing had abandoned his pride to thank him, yet not only did Cui Buqu offer no words of comfort, he went so far as to dress him down. Rongqing's face froze as Cui Buqu continued. Just think, everyone would have soon known that Censor Zhong arrived under orders to oversee the disaster efforts, yet he faltered before he'd even begun. They'd hear that the officials of Guangqian County were deep in mourning, that even the imperial censor has succumbed to the floods. This would serve as proof of the severity of the crisis, prompting the court to allot Guangqian County more relief grain. Yet you, Rongqing, would be the first official of Sui to perish in such a dubious matter. Cui Buqu paused, glancing at Rongqing with a faint smirk, thus becoming the target of countless jokes. At that moment, Rongqing finally realized what he disliked about the chief of the Zuoye Bureau. Whenever this man spoke to him, there was always another implication beneath his words. He sounded purely mocking now, yet he seemed to be insinuating something more. Something Rongqing couldn't grasp. And if Rongqing couldn't figure it out himself, Cui Buqiu certainly wouldn't explain. Some people had a natural affinity. They would share deep and meaningful conversations after meeting only briefly. But Rongqing was sure that no matter how many times he met Cui Buqiu, he'd never grow to like him. The man was too acerbic and too arrogant. Because the Empress was fond of him, he looked down his nose at everyone around him. Squashing his anger, Rongqing replied, "I know it was impolite of me to leave first. I've displeased the Lord Chief, but this disaster is getting worse by the minute. If I arrived a day earlier, I'd be able to start my investigations and report a day earlier, and perhaps more people could be saved." "So you rushed here and almost died," said Cui Buqiu unceremoniously. Rongqing drew himself up. "If Chief Cui refuses to engage in a proper conversation, then I shall take my leave. I will assuredly repay you for saving my life, but while we are here in Guangtian, let us go our separate ways." The censor, too, was a stubborn man. He believed he was in the right, and was thus unwilling to endure more reproach. Cui Buqiu twitched a finger. Before Guan Shanhai realized what it meant, Qiao Xian was in motion. She drew her sword and held it to Rongqing's neck. "Let you go?" she said coldly. Rongqing was so furious he laughed. "So this is the fabled tyranny of the Zuoya Bureau? You dare threaten imperial officials on a whim? It's small wonder everyone at court trembles at the mere mention of you. If Chief Cui desires the kind of power that sends people scurrying out of your way in fear, you've certainly achieved it." Cui Buqiu was unfazed. "You nearly lost your life here, mere days after arriving. Once word gets out, the reputation of the Zhong clan and all the hard-earned accomplishments of your father will be sullied by your actions." Rongqing was stunned. "You know about my father?" 2 years ago, your father, Rong Qi, assumed the position of magistrate of Moa County in You province. When the Guk Turks came to plunder the city, he remained fearless, refusing to surrender even in the face of death. Your father lost his life trying to hold the city gates before reinforcements reached him. In recognition of his unwavering loyalty, His Majesty promoted his son, Yu, to imperial censor. At the mention of his father, most of Rongqing's anger quietly fizzled out. He was silent for a moment. "To be honest, I've been doing quite a bit of investigating here over the past few days. There's something strange happening in Guangtian County." The rains that year had been exceptionally heavy. On Rongqing's journey into the county, the downpour had persisted for 10 days. He'd chosen one of the official roads that traversed higher terrain, steering clear of the river. Because the official road was only muddy and had yet to be submerged, it wasn't until he reached his destination that he grasped the full extent of the disaster. Much of the city was submerged, and even the outskirts were challenging to navigate. Refugees streamed into the city, but capacity was limited. Only a portion of them could be accommodated. County Magistrate Huang Lue resettled as many as he could on the west side of the city and provided them with honest work. Each day they transported mud outside the city, constructing an embankment to combat the relentless advance of the flood. Rongqing had gone to oversee the endeavor himself and found it commendable. The city had taken in the refugees and given them something to do, mitigating any potential unrest. But while the disaster here in Guangtian City had been addressed, the cities and neighboring counties within the commandery hadn't such capable magistrates. The waters remained high, and the food within their storehouses was limited. Huang Lue hoped Rongqing would bring their plight to the court's attention so they could secure more relief grain. Rongqing wished to do exactly that. But as the censor sent by the court, he couldn't make his decision on the word of Huang Lue alone. He'd sought out Deputy Magistrate Li Yan and made some private inquiries. Li Yan had stammered his way through his answers, making Rongqing suspect he was hiding something. The censor had questioned him doggedly until Li Yan finally let something slip. It was in pursuit of this lead that Rongqing had personally gone to the outskirts of the city for a look. Abruptly, Rongqing changed the subject. 2 nights ago, I received a strange painting." He gestured for Xiao Liu to fetch it over. The painting lacked any mounting and was simply rolled up. Rongting spread it out for them to see. At the center of the scene stood a granary, with countless people arranged around it, transporting grain away. On the left, a man in an official's robe sat with his servants flanking him, indulging in a feast as he surveyed the activity. The workers buzzed about in convincing urgency. On the right side of the painting, near the granary, there was a small mountain of bodies, men and women, old and young, all sprawled on the ground in various unnatural poses. Their emaciated and jaundiced forms exuded agony. Some lay dead, while others clung precariously to life. One man was depicted gnawing on a severed limb, while nearby, a child missing an arm wailed as blood streamed across the ground. When one looked only at the left and center of the painting, it appeared ordinary, but in combination with the right side, the effect was stomach-turning. Rongting remembered the shock he'd had when he first laid eyes on the painting. He'd stared at it blankly, oblivious to the passage of time. Now he watched as Cui Buqiu casted the briefest of glances. The man didn't even blink. As expected, a man of callous ambition, thought Rongting. This man. Rongting tapped the official depicted eating on the left side of the painting. Guangtian County was officially a first-tier county, which means their magistrate holds 6th rank status. But after 2 years of natural disasters, the county was downgraded to 2nd tier. Their magistrate, Huang Lue, should have accordingly been demoted to the 7th rank. Since his debriefing before the court has yet to arrive, he retains his rank for the time being. The man in the painting is dressed in a scarlet minister's robe devoid of ornamentation. Although his face isn't clearly visible, he can be none other than Huang Lue. So you believe someone sent you an anonymous report after learning of your arrival, suggesting that the county magistrate, Huang Lue, has been embezzling grain and misreporting the disaster. Correct. Rongting had been rattled, but he'd managed to follow his more rational instincts and refrain from immediately confronting Huang Lue. Still, he couldn't contain his restlessness, and had thus opted for a more indirect approach. He'd sought out other officials in Guangtian County in hopes of gleaning more information. In truth, it was this that had led to his conversation with Deputy Magistrate Li Yan, in which he'd witnessed the man's hesitant, stumbling answers. He'd also discovered that aside from Li Yan, several officials in Guangtian County were on poor terms with Huang Lue. For example, County Lieutenant Wu Yi. The 3 most important officials in Guangtian County, the magistrate, the deputy magistrate, and the county lieutenant, appeared united. But once Rongting scratched the surface, he found a game of deep intrigue beneath the bloodless flash of hostilities playing out on the surface. There was only so much Rongting could uncover in a day. But the next night, he received a second painting. It was on the same type of paper, with the same brushstrokes. Rongting unrolled the second painting in front of Cui Buqiu. This time, there were no officials, yet the imagery was, if anything, more chilling. Amid the surging floodwaters, broken-off branches bobbed and corpses drifted. A black-haired head floated among them, gazing up at the sky. The expression on its face twisted in a silent wail of despair. In the distance lay the city, while in the foreground stood an old tree atop a hill. Beneath its outstretched limbs, a man knelt in the mud, desperately digging with his bare hands. Several hands lay to the side, seemingly unearthed from the mire, their half-rotted flesh clinging to a dense thicket of white bone. It was a scene of approaching hell, where all trace of the Buddhas had vanished. Guan Shanhai had been observing quietly from the side, yet when he saw the painting, he let out an involuntary gasp. Rongting looked at him knowingly. That's right. This is the tree where I was stranded today. It was this painting that compelled me to travel there myself, to see if it really existed. He'd proven that the tree was real, but before he could start digging, the rain had caused the floodwaters to rise precipitously. Had Guan Shanhai not arrived at that moment, Rongqing would likely be a wandering ghost. Now Chief Cui must understand that there was a reason behind my actions. Cui Bichu ignored his aggrieved tone. Then I assume you're now even more suspicious of Huang Lue? Rongqing nodded. Huang Lue vehemently opposed my proposal to survey the lands outside the city, and County Lieutenant Wu was also notably absent. Instead, it was Li Yan, the deputy magistrate, who accompanied me. This practically proves there's something suspicious about Huang Lue. Any reasonable person would object to leaving the city in the middle of a relentless rainstorm and a raging flood. Why didn't you suspect Li Yan of ulterior motives? Perhaps he was taking the opportunity to silence you. Rongqing paused, momentarily speechless. Huang Lue is the magistrate of Guangtian County. In almost every matter, he's the one with the final say. What can a deputy magistrate like Li Yan do? But it's not just Guangtian County that's affected. Most of the region is underwater. If I were in your position, I wouldn't let 2 questionable paintings cloud my judgment. By now, Rongqing was convinced Cui Bichu disliked him and that he was deliberately making his life difficult at every turn. He couldn't be bothered trying to convince him. Sometimes there was no point in further discussion. He changed the topic. Tomorrow, Huang Lue is hosting a banquet for all the wealthy families in the city to discuss relief efforts. He's invited me as well. If Chief Cui refuses to believe me, come see for yourself who the heroes and villains are in this situation. With a final cold snort, Rongqing walked away. How convoluted, Guan Shanhai thought. It was as if a dense fog enveloped them, refusing all their efforts to clear it. Guan Shanhai was accustomed to the straightforward conflicts of the battlefield. He had never encountered a situation with as many complexities as this one. To an uninformed observer, duties seemed clearly assigned across the various ranks of officials. Yet closer inspection suggested things weren't so simple. The court had disbursed a substantial amount of grain, but had it truly been needed? A feud was simmering between County Magistrate Huang and Deputy Magistrate Li. Were they using Rongqing? Who had sent them those paintings, and why? Did someone wish to show him the truth, or were they trying to eliminate him? The more Guan Shanhai pondered the situation, the more his head throbbed. Thank the heavens he was a military official. It wasn't his responsibility to deal with matters of this type. Still, he doubted Cui Bichu was so godlike he could effortlessly unravel the situation the instant he descended upon the county. What he did know was that, in order to catch up with Rongqing, Cui Bichu had to cut his planned travel time in half. His already fragile health seemed to have deteriorated further over the journey, yet he had never uttered a word of complaint. Guan Shanhai was still unhappy about his new assignment, but his antipathy toward Cui Bichu had softened. He couldn't resist whispering, "How did you know Censor Zhong was in danger?" Here, Rongqing is a knife. Whoever wields him will use him to threaten others. Cui Bichu heaved a sigh. Perhaps we'll soon witness a few of the many ways in which Rongqing might meet his end. Huh? Guan Shanhai was perplexed. He hadn't a clue what Cui Bichu meant. Rongqing, too, was perplexed. He was sitting among the wealthy and renowned of the city in the garden behind the county office. At County Magistrate Huang Lue's invitation, everyone had come to the banquet to discuss the floods plaguing the county. What baffled Rongqing was that Cui Bichu, full of cutting sarcasm just the day before, was now sitting behind him as meekly as a sheep. He'd put on a false beard and introduced himself to the assembly as Cui Xiancheng. With this small change to his appearance and demeanor, he transformed himself into Rongqing's very close aide. The members of the local literati and the merchants were terribly curious about this imperial censor Zhong. Nearly everyone came up for some polite conversation or to ingratiate themselves. In the process, they inevitably noticed Cui Bichu behind him. A few curious souls directed a question or two his way, but he remained reserved and quiet until Rongqing stepped in to answer on his behalf. Rongqing knew Cui Bichu wished to conceal his identity, and that suited him perfectly. He had no desire for anyone to learn that the so-called aide at his shoulder was in fact a representative of the Zuoyue Bureau. If word got out, people might think the court didn't trust Rongqing and had sent someone to monitor him. But he hadn't anticipated Cui Buchu would be such a flawless actor. Watching him now, it was as though he was a different person entirely. He aimed to portray a reticent subordinate, and he truly didn't say a word. Even his gaze became gentle and harmless, his tone soft. The sharpness of the previous day was nowhere to be found. As more guests arrived to greet him, Rongqing had no more attention to spare for Cui Buchu's drastic transformation. He noted that the majority of those in attendance were young, many the eldest or second sons in their families. Very few patriarchs were present. One young man was particularly eye-catching. He appeared around 20, with conspicuous good looks. He was the 14th child in the Li family, a number from which he took his name, Li Shi, and a distant relative of Deputy Magistrate Li himself. Rongqing only now learned that Li Yan belonged to a well-off local clan. The Li family was apparently influential throughout all the Guangqian County. Li Shi had arrived with his cousin, the eldest son of the Li family. His companion was a stoic young man, and by contrast, Li Shi was bursting with energy. He bounced around the gathering, toasting everyone he encountered, and approached Rongqing several times, disregarding formalities and bombarding the censor with questions. His curiosity extended to Cui Buchu as well as he stood at Rongqing's side. I hear Cui Xianxiang hails from the Southern Dynasty. Why did you choose to come north rather than remaining an official there? What kind of scenery does the Southern Dynasty have? Is it truly filled with mountains, rivers, and flowers, with melodious songs playing wherever you go? Li Shi pressed forward with each question until he was a hair's breadth from Cui Buchu. If it weren't for his youthful charm and the curiosity shining on his face, he'd likely have been reprimanded already for his rudeness. Cui Buchu gave him a bashful smile. Not everyone who aspires to be an official can achieve this goal. I lack proficiency in both the pen and the sword, so I sought refuge with my relatives in the north. Fortunately, Censor Zhong was kind enough to hire me and let me help him with copying paperwork. As for the scenery you mentioned, I believe there's a little difference between the mountains and rivers of the north and the south. Huh! Goodness! Cui Xianxiang, your wrists are so slim and delicate. Li Shi's eyes sparkled like he'd discovered some new treasure. He caught Cui Buchu's wrist and refused to let go. I've heard many men in the south are interested in other men, and some have strange tastes, like a preference for older ones. I wonder, did you attract that type of attention? Is that why you ran away to take refuge in the north? Chapter 133. Cui Buchu yanked his wrist away, but failed to win himself free. Everyone around them looked over, including Rongqing. The censor wore an expression of bemusement as he watched the young man's frivolous antics. Had Li Shi been teasing a beautiful woman, Rongqing would likely have already intervened. But Cui Buchu was wearing a beard and clearly a scholar, not to mention secretly an agent of the Zuoyue Bureau. Rongqing silently recalled all the most terrifying rumors he'd heard about them, and one thought filled his mind. This man really has some nerve. He gazed at Li Shi in sympathy. If Cui Buchu had come as himself, Li Shi would by now have been sliced into several dozen pieces by his glare, then tossed into a sizzling wok. But at that moment, Cui Buchu was Cui Xianxiang, Rongqing's personal aide, shy and taciturn. His behavior presented a character wholly different from the normal Cui Buchu. On Cui Xianxiang's face was a mixture of shock and confusion, as if he'd received a grave and unexpected insult. "Unhand me!" He shook off the other man's grip and this time succeeded. But as Li Shi released him, his fingers brushed lightly over Cui Buchu's palm, a playful and flirtatious gesture. It seemed this young man was quite experienced in the art of seduction, with no preference between men or women. He turned to Rongqing. "Censor Zhong, Cui Xianxiang and I share a natural rapport. Might you be willing to give him to me? Only name your price." Ridiculous. Cui Xiansheng is a human being, not an object. Zhongqing reproached him. How can you say such a thing? Please leave us be. Zhongqing had come ready for a battle of wits and courage. He hadn't anticipated Li Shise, and the young man's sudden appearance disrupted his momentum completely. Shusilang, mind your manners! The eldest son of the Li family bustled over, bowing to Zhongqing with a helpless expression. Please forgive him, Censor Zhong. My cousin was raised in Luoyang as the son of a widow. I'm afraid he's become rather willful. Censor, you're a generous man. Please don't let yourself be upset by the likes of him. Li Shise's face was the picture of unconcern. What do you mean by willful, cousin? I want this gentleman. He's not Censor Zhong's wife, son, or father, so why can't he give him to me? I'll offer Cui Xiansheng some money and hire him as a scribe, working for him or working for me. What difference is there? Zhongqing's face darkened, and he raised his voice. Did Magistrate Huang invite me here so I could witness such a farce? Upon hearing the commotion, County Magistrate Huang Lue hurried over with his escort. The Li family pulled Li Shise back toward his seat, scolding him as they went. Li Shise muttered in dissatisfaction, but tried nothing further after his cousin's reprimand. He remained seated, his gaze wandering often toward Cui Buqu. When Cui Buqu glanced over, the young man responded with a cheerful grin. Cui Buqu's face remained blank. He looked away. Though Zhongqing was a guest, he was also an envoy with the important position of imperial censor. County Magistrate Huang Lue graciously gave him the seat of honor. Sitting at Zhongqing's side, Cui Buqu was conveniently afforded a clear view of the entire venue. The guests at the banquet were all local landlords from prominent families. As their wealth was in the land, the current disaster was a harsh blow. Once the floodwaters receded, their harvest would be ruined. They wouldn't be able to collect taxes this year even if they wished to. They looked around with strained smiles, striving to keep their spirits up, but none were in any mood to enjoy a feast, even if the offerings had been mythical phoenix livers. Huang Lue took the seat below Zhongqing's and raised his voice to be heard. Under normal circumstances, we wouldn't think of holding a banquet with the flood ongoing. However, today we're graced with the presence of some esteemed scholars from our city. They were delighted to hear Censor Zhong had come to assess the situation and offered to visit as soon as possible. This humble magistrate thought it best to summon all of them here at once so you could speak to them. The censor was only here to make inquiries about the flooding and oversee the relief efforts. Supplying grain to the displaced victims would be his priority, lest the people's desperation turn into rebellion. In this respect, the affluent landowners had nothing to gain from the censor, so none of them were enthusiastic about the banquet. When Huang Lue said they had offered to visit, they silently cursed him for distorting the truth to flatter their guest. Zhongqing, on the other hand, was pleased by Huang Lue's tact. If Huang Lue hadn't taken the initiative to invite him, he'd have had to seek out all the prominent families in the county himself. His orders weren't simply to assess the situation, but also to ensure the grain had genuinely gone to disaster relief and that the landowners weren't colluding with the local officials to profit from the situation. He'd only recently been appointed censor, and this was his first official trip outside the capital. He'd consulted a senior official for guidance before he left and committed all his advice to memory. In short, he was quite satisfied with Huang Lue's performance. There were no delicacies on offer at tonight's banquet. The menu featured many ordinary vegetarian dishes, almost overly humble. Zhongqing even spotted a dish from his own hometown. Although he suspected Huang Lue had arranged it to pander to him, it was only a simple plate of cold vegetables, so he enjoyed it without guilt. Everyone took turns coming up to toast him, including Deputy Magistrate Li Yan and County Lieutenant Wu Yi. Zhongqing couldn't snub them, so, in the spirit of the occasion, he took a few small sips of wine. Before the alcohol could affect him, he set down his cup and cleared his throat. Although the imperial court has indeed allocated supplies for disaster relief, On my journey here, I witnessed firsthand the raging floods that have submerged so many homes and fields. This disaster has displaced the common folk, leaving countless families devastated. While Magistrate Huang has permitted the victims to enter the city, the grain from the court will feed them for less than 2 weeks. Even if the floods recede and rice is replanted, it won't be ready for harvest until next spring. Before that, your people here must endure a harsh winter. All the guests present were well educated. They didn't need him to elaborate. Everyone saw where he was going with his speech. A middle-aged man surnamed Ding interrupted him. We all greatly admire Sincerong's compassion and concern for the people. When the flood arrived, the water drowned our fields. My kind-hearted mother couldn't bear to see our tenant farmers starve, so she took food from our family's warehouses to feed them. Now we're left with nothing. The county has been completely devastated by this disaster. We're forced to import food to feed our own children. It's too expensive for my family to bear. I implore Censor Zhong to think of a way to save us. Before coming, Zhongqing had heard that the Ding family were the largest landowners in the county, and that one of their members served as an official in court. As soon as the man spoke up, others hurried to voice their agreement. That's right. Our fields were submerged too. We've no more food in our stores. We implore the censor to petition the court for more grain. Censor Zhong, your lordship must think of the people. The cries poured in from every side, leaving Zhongqing dumbfounded. He'd come here tonight, planning to ask the landlords to donate their surplus food, but instead, they'd seized their chance to bemoan their own poverty. Now it was too late to say what he'd intended. County Magistrate Li had a timely interjection. Everyone, Censor Zhong arrived just a few days ago. He's here with us now to gain a better understanding of the situation. If you have any grievances, feel free to voice them. But after tonight, anyone found slandering the imperial court will face serious consequences. While Huang Lue had watched coolly from the sidelines, Li Yan had stepped up to speak. Zhongqing's fondness for Li Yan grew. Yet, before he could respond, a familiar voice rang out. Deputy Magistrate Li, please forgive my humble self for disagreeing with your words. Zhongqing looked over and realized the speaker was none other than Li Shisi, the young man who'd teased Cui Buqu. There are countless rumors flying about at the moment. People are saying the court will send no more relief, and that we must fend for ourselves. We didn't spread these tales. Our family used to provide our servants with 3 meals a day, but now we can only afford to give them 2. Everyone is suffering hardships. Our situation isn't much better than the refugees. It's only because we live in the city that our homes are still intact. But if the rain persists, it won't be long before the flood engulfs the city as well, and then all of Guangqian County will face ruin. Should we stay here or leave while we still can? We implore Censor Zhong to assist us in this decision. Li Shisi's tone was flippant. He displayed a complete lack of restraint and little respect for Zhongqing. The young man was acting exactly like a spoiled, hedonistic son of a rich family. Zhongqing's expression darkened. We're all in the same boat and facing the same challenges. Yet here you are talking about fleeing to save yourselves. On the battlefield, this kind of talk would destroy an army's morale. I'll tell you the truth. The contents of the court's warehouses are limited. Many flood victims are at risk of starving and freezing to death during the oncoming winter. Aside from the fact that you'll have no farmers and thus no crops next year, discontent among the people will breed unrest. At that point, your family will be the one in trouble. Here it comes, the assembly thought. After all the beating around the bush, Censor Zhong finally got to the point. Of course, he hopes to squeeze the landlords for food and money. But why would we relinquish these so easily? The court may still step in and spare us the trouble. Shisa spoke again, giving voice to what everyone was thinking. You're wrong, Censor Zhong. If that happens, we can simply leave. The man named Ding sighed. Censor Zhong, of course we wish to support our hometown, but while we possess the heart, we lack the means. Others chimed in as well. That's right. We can't even save ourselves. How can we be expected to save others? That's enough, Huang Lue finally spoke. Over the past 2 years, Guangtian Commandery has established a policy of donating food to the official granaries in return for tax reductions. Thanks to this, we could support ourselves in the face of small setbacks. Unfortunately, the current flooding is a major disaster. The imperial court has provided grain, but it also requires contributions from its citizens. As with the previous 2 years, we will continue to offer tax reductions for those who donate food. However, we need everyone's input on what these reductions should look like. Let's discuss this matter openly and share our ideas. Everyone exchanged glances, but it was the persistently annoying Li Shise who spoke up once more. Magistrate Huang, we've told you already. It's not that we're unwilling to donate. We simply don't have food to spare. Even if the court waives a decade of taxes, we have nothing to contribute. Zhongqing felt tonight's meal was one of the most miserable experiences of his life. He thought he had a grasp on the situation in Guangtian County. Tonight, he'd planned to make a strong impression in his new role and maybe even show off in front of Cui Buchu, hoping to put a dent in that impressive aura. But he hadn't anticipated the obstacles he faced at every turn. Not only were the landlords uncooperative, even the officials of Guangtian County displayed little enthusiasm for his cause. Who had sent him those 2 anonymous paintings? Zhongqing had hoped to use the banquet to ferret out a clue or two, but the responses from the officials and landlords had put him on the back foot. Cui Buchu had remained silent the entire time. He's probably laughing at this farce, Zhongqing thought glumly. His spirits sank even lower, and without realizing it, he reached for his cup of wine more frequently. It was true Cui Buchu thought Zhongqing too inexperienced. He felt the man had been led around by the nose all night, but his attention wasn't truly focused on him. Li Shise's initial behavior had led him to suspect his new acquaintance was Feng Xiao in disguise. Changing one's age and appearance wasn't particularly surprising. Qiao Xian could do it too. That's just so... They themselves had engaged in a game of disguise back in the Western Cognate. Li Shise was flashy and ostentatious, just like Feng Xiao. But when Li Shise raised a toast to County Lieutenant Wu Yi, a spontaneous look of obsequiousness had crept over his face, and Cui Buchu's confidence had faltered. Feng Xiao had never displayed such humility and submission toward anyone in Cui Buchu's experience. That Feng bastard acted careless and never took anything seriously, but deep down, he was immeasurably proud. He looked down on everyone who wasn't him, so asking him to act humble or submissive toward anyone was an impossible task. Li Shise was therefore merely Li Shise. He couldn't have anything to do with that Feng bastard. Cui Buchu frowned and lowered his lashes. It was the first time he'd been confused about his own suspicions. He had left the city without a word. Even if Fungar noticed his absence, he couldn't have located him so quickly, let alone chased after him and created an entirely new identity by the time Cui Buchu arrived. So why did Cui Buchu feel so full of doubts? Why did thoughts of Fungar linger in his mind, no matter whom he encountered? Chapter 134. While Cui Buchu observed Li Shise, he himself was being observed. Most people's attention remained on Zhongqing, the star of tonight's gathering. Cui Buchu had kept a low profile, submersing himself in his role as a clerk who handled paperwork more often than people, a man who rarely made social appearances and was unfamiliar with such grand settings. The clerk he was playing had never been to a banquet like this. He felt at a loss, and somewhat shy. He spoke little, was reluctant to join any conversation, and was helpless in the face of harassment from a playboy like Li Shise. Zhongqing hadn't hurried to help his aide out of the awkward situation. The two seldom conversed, and their expressions demonstrated a clear distance. It seemed Zhongqing was not particularly close to his aide. Perhaps he had no one competent around him and had been forced to hastily choose someone to fill the role. Just as the rumors said, Censor Zhong was new to his post and had only a superficial understanding of the situation he'd found himself in. In a place like Wanqian County, it was inevitable that he'd be played for a fool. Some people considered this information thoughtfully, while others relaxed and felt relieved. Zhongqing noticed the sly gazes on him, but he couldn't exactly slam his hands on the table and leap up to confront the guests. It would only breed further contempt. The wine in his cup smelled faintly of sweet grass. It was likely a local specialty. He downed a cup and savored the aftertaste. As he watched the wine rippling against the rim, his eyelids began to droop. Cui Buchu would have watched coldly from the sidelines, but Cui Xianxiang was in Zhongqing's service. It'd be unusual if he didn't offer any advice. "My lord, you should drink a little less. County Magistrate Huang is watching you," he whispered. "It's none of your business." Wine truly bolstered one's courage. Zhongqing had initially been wary of around Cui Buchu, but now he'd thrown caution to the wind. Cui Buchu adopted a look of helplessness, then coughed a few times. His face was pale. The maid serving the wine couldn't resist bending down and whispering in his ear, "My lord, there's some lime wine at the residence which should help with intoxication. Should I fetch it?" Cui Buchu looked up at the maid's delicate features in surprise. The girl blushed faintly and lowered her head. "Then I must trouble the lady." "It's no trouble at all," the maid quietly replied. Although this gentleman was on the older side, she found him gentle and considerate. She was a common girl working as a maid in the county office's back courtyard, and in a couple of years she would be seeking a husband. If she could find one like Cui Xianqiang, who was older and understood how to care for others, wouldn't that be perfect? At that thought, the maid's cheeks grew pinker still. "You can call me Ju'er," she said hastily before going to fetch the wine. Cui Buchu hadn't anticipated that even as the frustrated aide of an imperial censor, he would attract a bit of romance. But he had no time to ponder this because County Magistrate Huang was approaching with the cup in hand. "Censor Zhong has traveled a long way. I should have thrown a grand banquet to welcome you, but unfortunately, Guangqian County is struggling in these floods. This banquet is hardly worthy of you. I ask for your understanding, Censor Zhong." Zhongqing slowly stood. His mind was still clear, although his hand holding the cup trembled slightly. "May I ask when Governor Yang will arrive?" he inquired, referring to Yang Yun, the local commandery governor. Huang Lue looked apologetic. "The whole commandery has been battered by the disaster, and Governor Yang is busy with official duties. I've just been informed he won't make it tonight." Zhongqing was instantly upset. One of the principal reasons he'd attended tonight's banquet was because Huang Lue had assured him Commandery Governor Yang would be present. But he wasn't. Not only had he not shown up, he hadn't even sent a deputy to make his excuses, but simply had a servant relay the message to Huang Lue. It was an obvious slight. From top to bottom, no one in Guangqian County took Zhongqing seriously as imperial censor, nor were they concerned in the least with what he might report to the emperor. Yang Yun was a royal relative, the emperor's nephew, and had a good relationship with the crown prince, Yang Yong. He, no doubt, thought himself untouchable. As it stood, Zhongqing couldn't prove the officials of Guangqian County were derelict in their duties. They had diligently provided disaster relief to the flood victims. The granaries had been emptied, and since the waters outside the city had yet to recede, the county magistrate was working hard to shelter as many refugees as possible. If Zhongqing accused them of wrongdoing without evidence, he would be the one to face consequences. Cui Buchu's voice suddenly rang in his ears. "If I were you, I wouldn't have come to the banquet tonight." Although annoyed, Zhongqing still couldn't help pricking up his ears to listen. You have nothing on them, yet you want them to cough up their possessions. You might as well rob them in broad daylight. It'd be faster. It's no surprise Yang Yuan didn't appear tonight. Before coming here, I sent my people to investigate. Although Guangqian County has always suffered from floods, previous years were not nearly so dramatic. Zhongqing's heart stirred. He couldn't stop himself from asking, So, in other words, within the last 2 years, they never reached the point of needing to donate grain for exemption from taxes? Are Yang Yuan and Huang Lue deceiving the emperor? Cui Buchu looked down at the banquet table, his expression unchanged. From what I know, in the first year of the Kai Huang era, Guangqian harvested around 300 tons of grain. Last year, it was 180 ton. The imperial warehouses sent grain after this flood, yet Huang Lue claims the county granaries are empty. Do you dare believe it? Huh, so I wasn't wrong, Zhongqing murmured. There's definitely something fishy going on here. Don't alert the enemy before you need to, said Cui Buchu. Get to the bottom of everything first. What we need is proof of their guilt. If we have that, threatening them with their families, seizing them and killing them, sending heads rolling, that will all be on the table, and everything will fall neatly into place. It doesn't matter if the guilty party is Yang Yuan or Huang Lue. If they try to make a scene, we'll simply make a bigger one. His voice was very low, meant for Zhongqing's ears alone. Though he spoke softly, a shiver ran through Zhongqing at the murderous intent behind Cui Buchu's words, clearing his mind somewhat. As expected of the Zuoyue bureau chief, a man who could kill people without blinking, Zhongqing recalled the many rumors about Cui Buchu, most famous among them the recent incident at the Thousand Lantern Banquet, at which he brazenly confronted the most cherished of royal children, Princess Leping. Was there anyone he wouldn't dare kill? A chill raced down Zhongqing's spine. He frowned. Such ruthless methods will put innocents in harm's way. We're here to expose corruption, not unleash a massacre. Cui Buchu looked at him in astonishment. May I ask, Censor Zhong, how much corruption have you exposed so far? Zhongqing tamped down his anger. Sorry, hold on. Zhongqing tamped down his anger. Don't try to provoke me. I'll never do as you wish. If I did, what difference would there be between me, an imperial censor, and the thugs of the Zuoye Bureau? Before the Jade Juar could bring over the lime wine, the alcohol had gone to Zhongqing's head. His exchange with Cui Buchu had drained the last of his clarity. He swayed and collapsed against the banquet table. Cui Buchu shook him worriedly. My lord, my lord. Deputy Magistrate Li Yan looked over and sighed. Censor Zhong is so distressed over our plight here. All his worries have left him more susceptible to the wine. Huang Lue quickly ordered someone to take Zhongqing away to rest. Cui Buchu rose to follow when Huang Lue glanced at him and smiled. Cui Xianxiang, you've accompanied Censor Zhong the past few days and also have been working hard. Tonight, take some time to relax. Censor Zhong is our distinguished guest. Since your censor collapsed before the banquet ended, you should drink a few more cups on his behalf. Cui Buchu could scarcely refuse. He obediently drank 2 more cups. His cheeks were visibly flushed as he waved his hands and coughed. I really can't drink another drop. I truly can't. Li Yan and several others laughed to see him shed his tidy appearance. Cui Xianxiang is so honest. Tell him to drink, and he really drinks. As the saying goes, the servant takes after the master. But Cui Xianxiang appears much more generous than Censor Zhong. I wonder if Censor Zhong has any other plans for this trip. The seemingly innocent question came amid the barrage of jokes. Unable to hold his drink, Cui Buchu shook his head and propped his forehead in his hands. I don't know where my lord plans to go. Wherever it is, he won't take me along. He doesn't trust me. Grievance and injustice filled Cui Xianxiang's reddened eyes, which shimmered as though he were truly drunk. Seeing that they wouldn't be getting any information out of him, the crowd lost interest. Only Li Shise, who was wandering about toasting everyone in sight, approached again, attempting to shove a full cup of wine into Cui Buchu's hand. When Cui Buchu tried to refuse, Li Shise's expression became serious. What? Cui Xianxiang will drink wine from others, but not for me? Is the cup I gave you poisoned? Cui Buchu gazed back at him. his unfocused eyes brimming with guileless innocence. Li Shise laughed and grabbed Cui Buchu's hand, half forcing him to tip the cup back. Cui Xianxiang, if things aren't going well with Cincerone, why not seek out greener pastures? What pastures? Cui Buchu blinked sluggishly, as though he hadn't understood the question. Cincerone is stubborn and inflexible. What benefit is there in following him? Cui Xianxiang must work to support him, right? Cincerone has only just arrived in Guangqian. He wants to make a splash, but he hasn't bothered to ask if anyone else is willing. He's a lamb who's not afraid of tigers. There's no need for you to cling to a piece of rotten wood and sink along with it. Why not take this opportunity to change employers? Cui Buchu frowned. Sir, I've failed in my scholarly pursuits. I can only write and copy documents for a living. Who would want me other than Cincerone? Our Li family is one of the county's most prominent clans, and I happen to need someone with your skills. Come with me, and you won't struggle to make ends meet like you do now. I'll pay you double what Cincerone is offering, Li Shise said grandly. Cui Buchu frowned and remained silent, as if unable to make a decision. Li Shise didn't mind waiting for a response. While his back was to the crowd drinking and chatting, he took the chance to discreetly run his fingers over the tender flesh of Cui Buchu's wrist. The rough sensation made Cui Buchu tremble, and his face, already flushed from the wine, went even redder. Even if Cui Xianxiang was a complete and total fool, he'd have understood Li Shise was flirting with him. Seeing that he was getting angry, Li Shise leaned in with a smile. Cui Xianxiang, I really do like you. I'm genuinely thinking of your well-being. Your life under Cincerone is too hard. In fact, your life might even be in danger. Think about it carefully. Once you realize I'm right, simply go to the Xiangji restaurant and mention my name. The owner knows how to contact me. He drew closer again, and Cui Buchu leaned back slightly, out of reach. Li Jiangjun. Li Shise smirked. Why be so distant? It would be better to drop the Jun. Cui Buchu coughed harshly. Whether due to anger or illness, it was impossible to say. Li Liangjun, might I ask? Cui Buchu's voice was rough and melodious. Do you happen to know a man with the surname Feng? Li Shise thought maybe he'd misheard. Feng? He echoed in confusion. I don't believe my family's known anyone with that surname for over 8 generations. Why do you ask? It seems I've mistaken you for someone else, Cui Buchu replied coolly. You resemble him somewhat. Li Shise ran with this topic, laughing. I didn't expect Cui Xianxiang to enjoy such games. All right, call me Feng Shise when we meet in private. Cui Buchu shot to his feet. Magistrate Huang, I fear the wine has done me in. Please allow me to take my leave. Huang Lue waved a magnanimous hand. Juar, take Cui Xianxiang to rest. Li Shise didn't chase after Cui Buchu. He returned to his cousin only to be scolded again. Stop running around doing whatever you please. It's one thing to behave so preposterously when things are normal, but why torment Cincerone's aide today? I was just trying to probe for details about Cincerone for you, Li Shise said sweetly. He's the only aide Cincerone brought. He must know something of his plans. If we make inroads with him, maybe we can drive Cincerone away. The eldest son of the Li family snorted. You're better off watching out for yourself. Large matters such as these aren't for you to interfere in. Li Shise flashed him an abashed smile and bowed his head under the rebuke. All of the audacity he'd displayed with Cui Buchu seemed to have vanished. I'm only trying to help. Otherwise, Uncle will send me back to my hometown right after I got chased out. How embarrassing that would be. You... Exasperated, the Li family's eldest son shook his head at his cousin's failings. Zhongqing had a splitting headache. He opened bleary eyes and was startled to see a half-naked woman sleeping beside him. Panicked, he bent down to check his clothing, as tense as a chaste maiden. I thought Cincerone was looking for a night of passion. Why does he look like a woman who's been abducted to a bandit stronghold? Zhongqing's head jerked up. A man stood by the door, his lips quirked in a half-smile. It was none other than Cui Buchu, who had been drunk and stumbling just a short while ago. Chapter 135. I had some wine, Zhongting trailed off. There was no need to elaborate. Drinking created problems. He'd planned to get just a little tipsy, but he'd vastly overestimated his tolerance. The wine was sweet, so he hadn't worried overmuch. But after downing one cup after another, things had spiraled out of control. He'd passed out, oblivious to everything around him, and ended up in a honey trap. Who knew how many truths he'd spilled while drinking? Would Huang Lue use this to threaten him? Zhongting's mind raced. His face was ashen. He no longer cared whether Cui Buchu thought he was a fool. He had come here to accurately assess the situation, not land himself in hot water. His career as an official was just beginning. He couldn't afford any missteps. No matter how beautiful the woman, Zhongting believed he had the self-discipline to resist temptation. Yet now he'd gotten drunk and delivered himself straight into the enemy's hands. If not for me, you'd be drowning in the charms of a woman right now. As Cui Buchu approached, Zhongting felt a wave of guilt and instinctively shrank back. Yet, in the next moment, he realized what he'd done and his face burned with embarrassment. It suddenly dawned on him why he'd gone to such lengths to avoid Cui Buchu. Cui Xianqiang's gaze was razor-sharp, as if there was nothing he couldn't see through. What left his mouth was mostly biting mockery. To him, Zhongting's passionate enthusiasm was merely foolhardy courage. Everyone yearned to hear praise and desired to see beauty, and Zhongting was no exception. But this yearning had nearly led him to disaster. If Cui Buchu hadn't woken him, even if he sprouted 8 mouths in the morning, they wouldn't be enough to profess his innocence. Zhongting steeled himself. Thank you, Xianxiang. I was careless, he admitted. Cui Buchu hadn't the slightest interest in cowing Zhongting. He didn't bat an eye as Zhongting attempted to get out of bed and put on his boots. Lie down. You can't leave. Huh? Zhongting was momentarily stunned, but he soon understood. If he left now, he'd offend Huang Lue's pride and make it difficult to conduct any further investigations. He opened his mouth to speak, then hesitated and looked back at the woman in his bed. He couldn't tell if she was asleep or merely pretending, which made conversation inconvenient. Cui Buchu leaned forward and patted the woman's cheek, his touch anything but gentle. Wake up. The beauty woke in a daze and found 2 men looking down at her. She opened her mouth to scream, but Cui Buchu was faster. He clapped one hand over her mouth and struck the back of her neck with the other. The woman went limp and collapsed. Now she was unconscious for certain. Zhongting was speechless. He'd expect nothing less of the notorious Zuo Yue Bureau. Even their chief was ruthless. I took a look around outside when I came in, he heard Cui Buchu say. If Huang Lue and his allies intended to corrupt Zhongting, there was no need to set anyone outside to eavesdrop on him. As long as he spent the night here, people would assume he was on Huang Lue's side. Zhongting pondered for a moment. If I leave at dawn, won't the person who sent the paintings think I've submitted to Huang Lue? They might stop sending clues altogether. Shouldn't I instead pretend to wake up in the middle of the night, make a scene, and leave? So he wasn't completely hopeless after all. Cui Buchu's mouth curled into a smile. Perhaps, but how much of a scene can you make on your own? Zhongting shot him a quizzical look. Li Yan had also drunk immoderately at the banquet. By the end of the night, his servants had to help him stumble into the carriage. He slept soundly until the next morning, when a trusted aide came with reports of a major incident at Magistrate Huang's residence the previous night. Censor Zhong had woken in the dead of night to discover a beautiful woman at his side. Enraged, he'd stormed into the next room and, finding his aide drunk as well, struck the man before grabbing a servant from the county office to help locate Huang Lue. The censor had then yanked Huang Lue from his bed and berated him for indulging in hedonistic pleasures with the disaster ongoing. The unfortunate county magistrate Huang received a punch to the eye. He wouldn't be fit to appear in public for the next few days. Li Yan burst into laughter. When he finally caught his breath, he asked, "Did Censor Zhong really sleep with that woman?" His aide winked. "I heard she woke up with her clothes in disarray and bruises all over her body. She was crying and complaining about the pain. It seems Censor Zhong hasn't had a proper meal in quite some time. He went a bit overboard." Li Yan laughed again. "Perhaps she lacks experience. This Rongqing may be reckless and rude, but he poses no real threat," his aide said, laughing with him. "Once the flood recedes, he'll have no choice but to depart empty-handed. Then everything will return to normal. All will be well." Li Yan shook his head. "That won't do. If nothing changes, how will I rise in the ranks and replace Huang Lue? That bastard is so indecisive. It's clear he's wavering. There's a high chance he'll end up ruining things. Best for him and Zhongqing to battle it out. Let them take care of each other. Go fetch me a brush and some paper." When Cui Buqiu and Zhongqing returned to their lodgings at the relay station, they met Guan Shanhai on his way in. Neither Guan Shanhai nor Qiao Xian had attended the previous night's banquet for two reasons. First, bringing two expert martial artists as their guards would inevitably attract attention when they needed to keep a low profile. And second, if they were to be recognized, it would expose the involvement of the Zuoyue Bureau, which would hinder their investigation. "What did you find?" Zhongqing couldn't resist asking Guan Shanhai. Guan Shanhai glanced at Cui Buqiu. On receiving a nod, he said, "The Lord Chief ordered me to investigate Yang Yun, the governor of Guangtian Commandery." Zhongqing was taken aback. "Yang Yun? Shouldn't we be investigating Huang Lue?" "If Huang Lue is corrupt, do you think Yang Yun is unaware? He's either feigning ignorance or an incompetent coward trapped under Huang Lue's thumb. Or perhaps he's the real leader. Whichever it is, he cannot escape blame." Zhongqing was stunned. He'd never considered the third possibility. "Yang Yuan's first wife died in childbirth over 10 years ago," Guang Shanhai reported. "He married again, but his second wife bore him no children. She even urged him to take a concubine to ensure the continuation of the Yang family legacy, but Yang Yuan insisted on remaining true to his second wife. To this day, he has no issue." "He and his second wife must love each other dearly." Guan Shanhai shook his head. "Over the past 2 days, I assumed a false identity, bribed the Yang family servants, and made up a few reasons to speak to them. Governor Yang spends most of his time in his study. He doesn't share a bedroom with his wife." Zhongqing sensed some oddness in this, but couldn't put his finger on it. Cui Buqiu clarified things for him. "It's rare for a man, especially one of Yang Yuan's age, to be uninterested in sirring his own children. It'd be one thing if he was devoted to his wife, but if he doesn't even share a bedroom with her, we can safely dismiss that possibility." Zhongqing gasped in understanding. "There's something strange about this Yang Yuan." Once the insight struck him, it unleashed a torrent of thoughts. If Yang Yuan is the culprit, Huang Lue won't escape unscathed. Last night, I was watching everyone at the gathering closely. Most of the landlords seemed to dread my appearance, as if I was about to demand a pound of their flesh. But the Li and Ding families, the largest landlords in the county and those who instigated the dispute last night, looked unconcerned. Perhaps they're already colluding with Huang Lue and embezzling grain. There's also Wu Yi, the county lieutenant. He drank more than anyone else last night, yet what's he done for the relief efforts? He must be involved as well. Why, Deputy Magistrate Li Yan might be the only clean person in the entire county." Face pale with anger, Zhongqing continued, "Yang Yuan didn't attend the banquet last night. I'd say it's because he has a guilty conscience." Midway through their conversation, Qiao Xian returned as well. She was carrying a large sack, her expression oddly conflicted. Her brows were tightly knit, and she glanced again and again at her sack. She seemed to yearn to toss it away, yet she clutched it as if afraid someone would take it from her. The stomach-turning stench of rot followed her through the door. "Lord Chief, the results of the investigation you ordered." She placed the sack on the table and opened it carefully. Zhongqing's eyes grew round, and his face drained of color. Within the sack lay a jumble of rags and robes, their original color indiscernible. But this was not the source of the stench. The smell came from the human remains, bloated and pale from immersion in the water, flesh still clinging to the bone beneath. Fingers, hands, hair, ribs, patches of rotting flesh that slipped from the bone, and limbs that appeared to have been gnawed on by wild beasts. Every single one bore visible slash wounds. Zhongqing jerked his head away and rushed out of the room. A moment later, the sound of retching came from outside. Cui Buchu remained composed. "Wrap them up, and have someone fetch a cup of water for Sensor Zhong." Zhongqing had drunk plenty the night before, but he hadn't eaten much. After emptying the contents of his stomach until there was nothing but bile, he finally made his way back, one hand on the wall for support. "Where did this come from?" he asked shakily. "Outside the city, the spot where you nearly drowned," said Qiaoxian. Zhongqing was stunned. "You dug them up by that tree? So what the painting showed me was real?" He took the water from Qiaoxian, but after a sip, a thought occurred to him. Did you wash your hands?" Qiaoxian looked at him expressionlessly. "No." Zhongqing had already swallowed some water. He couldn't even spit it out. His face instantly turned a vivid green. Seeing him on the verge of rushing out to vomit again, Qiaoxian grabbed him and dragged him back, clicking her tongue. "You're a man. Why are you being so fussy?" Zhongqing longed to cry, but he had no tears. He turned his head away to avoid looking at the sack. "How many corpses did you find?" "The flood receded slightly today. There was just barely enough room to stand by that tree. I uncovered these after just a little digging. There were more below them. If I kept digging—" Qiaoxian paused, then said sharply, "I feared I'd never reach the end." His lips quivered. Zhongqing didn't know what to say. At that moment, the station clerk arrived with a message. A child outside had asked the clerk to bring something in. The clerk produced a bamboo tube addressed to Zhongqing. Zhongqing tossed aside all thoughts of his churning stomach and demanded, "Where is the child? Bring him here, quickly." The clerk ducked his head in apology. "He's already run off. He only left this scroll. Take a look, my lordship." He hadn't missed the odd stench in the room and had stayed on the threshold, refusing to enter. When Qiaoxian threw him a handful of copper coins, he set down the tube and happily excused himself. Zhongqing unsealed the bamboo tube and pulled out a tightly rolled paper. Unfurling it revealed yet another painting. The style was the same as the first two, but the brushstrokes were much thicker this time. It looked to have been carelessly rolled up and stuffed into the bamboo tube directly upon completion. At the foot of the mountain sat a villa surrounded by trees. No guards stood near the villa gates, but on the steps squatted a large rat, almost half a pillar in height. Its tail curled behind it on the ground as it stared at the gates, and it leaned greedily forward, as if poised to dash in at any moment. Big rat, no Malay you shall eat. For 3 long years you've grown, no care for us you've shown. Big rat, no wheat you shall eat. For 3 long years you've grown, no kindness for us shown," Zhongqing recited. "Is this another hint telling us to visit this villa?" Quick footnote. These are lines from Big Rat, a poem in the section Heirs of the States, Ode to Wei, from the Book of Songs, the oldest collection of poetry in Chinese tradition. back to the reading. If the painting is accurate, the villa is surrounded by a dense forest, Cuibuchu replied. Assuming it's an area unaffected by the flood, it can only be the north of the city. Lord Chief, Xiaoshan interjected, if I may, our most urgent task should be to discover who's been sending the paintings. They've sent 3 in a row to censor Zhong, hinting at wrongdoing, but refuse to reveal their identity. Why continue skulking about in the dark? Perhaps they mean us ill and wish to lead us astray. But you also see now that all the hints were true, Rongting countered. How else could you have brought back that sack? A pile of corpses isn't an explanation. If there's really something suspicious happening at the villa in this painting, it must be heavily guarded. If you go rashly, you'll alert the enemy. Find it if you have the ability, but don't expect us to lead the charge. The Lord Chief doesn't come here to do your job for you. Stunned, Rongting flushed with shame. Enough, Cuibuchu said. Someone's already found the location for us. He pulled a piece of paper from his sleeve, then unfolded it and placed it on the table. Qixia Villa to the north of the city. The 9th night of the 9th month. Good for moon watching. Removing clothes. Will await your arrival. Come alone. Let's share warmth. The writing was unruly, without any signature, and the message made no sense. It was almost laughable. Yet this was the paper Li Shuse had stuffed into Cuibuchu's hand after teasing him the night before. All right, you guys, that concludes the reading for today. Really don't have a lot to say. We have kind of sort of basically changed perspectives going to this new fellow, the official censor, Zhongqing. And right now I don't really have much of an impression of him, just like a currently important character, but possibly just passing because Cuibuchu is just on a mission, from Empress Dugu. Anyway, the only things I want to comment on are, I guess, going backwards. So it's obvious that Li Yan is the one who's sending these paintings, and he's just trying to stir the pot so that Rongqing and Cuibuchu can handle Huang Lue so he doesn't have to. A man who doesn't want to get his hands dirty, at least any dirtier than maybe they already are. So my second to last note was about page 169, which technically is leading up to 169 from 168, when Cuibuchu was talking about Li Shise, which Li Shise is 14, Shi being 10, Se being 4. Anyway, where he was basically feeling like he was kind of acting like Feng Xiao and trying to see if maybe this was him. And then on page 169, it was like, why did thoughts of Fungar linger in his mind, no matter whom he encountered? I just have a sticky note that's like, yeah, why, Cuibuchu? The funny thing about this, though, is I still don't think he's realized that he's calling him Fungar in his mind, which is so adorable. But anyway, we know why he's in your mind. You can't stop thinking about him. He can't stop thinking about you. You just are understanding why you can't, and that's okay. It'll come eventually. So now the last thing that I want to make a note on is Feng Xiao messing around with Cuibuchu on page 139. When he was basically like, okay, sir, what do you want? And Feng Xiao said, I want you. And then after Cuibuchu was looking all stunned, like, what in the world? Then he was like, to do me a favor. I was like, technically, he was being 100% honest when he said, I want you. And he deliberately said it that way, gave a little pause, and then just added on the other stuff. But he probably just wanted to see your reaction, Cuibuchu, even though he really feels that way. For real, you just don't know that yet. So anyway, that's really all I have to comment on this time around. Not anything much. We'll see what comes of this whole situation after this flood, which I do know that there was recently a flood in Texas. So for anyone who may live in Texas, if you've lost any family, because I did hear reports of people having lost their lives. If you've lost your family or your home, or your work, anything like that. My heart goes out to you all, and I hope that you're able to find some kind of rest, solace, peace, work, shelter, and all of that stuff wherever you can. But other than that, you guys can leave your thoughts in the comment section. You guys, we are making our way through this book. Okay, there are 392 pages, and we'll be starting on page 191. So we have 202, but it's gonna be less than that because some of these are pictures and some of these are blank pages. But yeah, we have 200 pages left, so that's exciting. And yeah, other than that, well, I'm Ming.